everyone, this is Mrs. McCreary, and today we're going to be talking about fellowship, which is an elementary treatise. We're going to be talking about sections 124 to 126. So in section 124, it starts by saying the object of this rule is to divide a number into parts, which shall have a given relation to each other. So we're going to be talking about there's going to be some value at the end that we need to divide into sections, but those sections are going to be proportionally related to each other. So it's not just going to be straightforward fractions that we're dealing with. We're going to be dealing with parts of parts and different amounts of contribution and things like that. So we're going to be continuing to work with our proportions. We're going to be working with proportions, we're going to be working with fractions. We're just kind of going to look at this in a lot of different ways. Alright, so our first example is from section 124, and it says 3 merchants formed a company for the purpose of trade. The first advanced $25,000, the second $18,000, and the third $42,000. After some time they separated and wished to divide the joint profit, which amounted to $57,225. How much ought each one to have? So what we need to do, we're going to be, each merchant is entitled to part of the profit in proportion to what they advanced. So we're going to be looking at how much was advanced in total, their contribution, the total profit, and then the profit that they are entitled to. So this one is going to be just a nice straight proportion for each merchant. So if you add everything together, the total is going to be $85,000. All right, so we have $85,000 over $25,000 equals 57,225 over whatever that person is entitled to. So then, using our rule of threes, we find that, or we go ahead and multiply our second and third and divide by our first term. So we have 25,000 times 57,225, divided by 85,000. Now, since we have this extra 1,000 in both places, we can just go ahead and divide that out now and reduce it out now instead of reducing it out at the end. Okay. Alright, so we find that 25 times 57,225 is going to give us so that would be 1,430,625, and then we're going to divide that by 85. And so we find that this merchant gets roughly $16,830. And that is rounded, or I guess if we're going to be rounding it, it would be 31. There's a decimal after that. Okay, so the next merchant, we're going to be following the same procedures, same steps, just using that other value. And look, looks like I ran out of space here. So I'm just going to, okay, so the first merchant gets 16,831. rounded. Okay. And now the second merchant contributed $18,000. So again, doing the same thing. We're going to reduce out this 1,000 even just up there. So now we have 18 times 5,7,225 over 85 equals okay, so that gives us 1,030,050. Over 85 is going to give us okay, 12,118 and some cents. 12,118. Now we will clear out the parts we need to change. Okay. And the last merchant contributed $42,000, so we'll put our 42 in. 42. Again, still the same proportion, working the same problem. So 42 times 57,225 gives us 2,403,450 divided by 85, which gives us $28,276 roughly. And then to go ahead and check this in this example, we have it fairly easily. We can just add together our rounded amounts. So 16,831 plus 12,118 plus 28,276, and with the rounding we end up with 57,225. It did work out exactly that time. Since we rounded, there is always a little bit of room for error. So the number, going back to our definition, as if it were, we're trying to divide this $57,225 amongst the three merchants, but they're getting amounts back in relation to what they contributed. In your text, it talks about how what they contributed is, if we're talking in the business world, which this example is, that's called capital stock, and then the amount that they received back is their dividend. And we'll talk more about that next week. But that is how you solve this first problem. Okay, let's look at the next example from section 125. Okay, it is required to divide an estate of $67,250 among three heirs in such a manner that the share of the second shall be 2/5 of that of the first, and the share of the third 7/8 of that of the second. So what we need to do first is to figure all of this out in as compared to the first. How big everyone's share is as compared to the first. All right, so since the first person's share is undefined, we're going to go ahead and put that as our unit. The second person's share is clearly 2/5. Now, the tricky part here, it's not tricky, you just have to be aware of what you're reading. So the share of the third person is 7/8 of that of the second. So we have 7/8 of 2/5. That third person, again, you have to be aware, he's not just getting 7/8 of that of the first, it's 7/8 of that of the second. So we look at 7/8 of 2/5. I'm going to do some canceling quickly, and then we get, so this is 1, this is 4, that is going to be 7/20. All right, so the first person is getting a whole unit, the second person is getting 2/5, and the third person is getting 7/20. Well, that is lovely, but that doesn't really help us so much, so now we're going to go and look for our common denominators. Well, right now the only denominators we have are 5 and 20. 5 very nicely is a factor of 20 already. 1 can turn that into a fraction with any denominator, so it's going to be 20 over 20. Okay, so to get that 5 into a 20, we need to multiply by 4, so this is going to turn into 8/20, and then over here we have 7/20. Now, this is, their relative shares to each other, not the actual value of their shares. So we look at the first person, and they're getting 20 shares. The second person is getting 8 shares, and the last person is getting 7 shares. So for the moment, we're going to disregard the denominator, and because we just wanted to do that to compare how many shares each person is getting, because there aren't actually 20 shares. If there were 20 shares, that first person would have the entire estate. So 20 plus 8 plus 7 is going to give us 35. So we know they're getting 35 shares. That first person is still getting 20 of those shares. The second person is still getting 8 of those shares. And the third person is still getting 7 of those shares. We found the 25 by putting together all of the shares, because it doesn't say there's going to be a fourth inheritor or anything is going to be left over. So the total number of shares is how many there are going to be. And then this number we found here, when we got all of their shares in a common denominator, that's how many each person gets. So what we're going to do is take this 67,250 and divide it by the number of shares, the total number of shares, which is 35. So that's going to give us 1, 2, 3, 2. Let's go with 8 there. 24, 28. That might not be big enough. We'll see. 32. Oh, yep, that's 42. Okay, so we really needed this to be a 9. How much space do we have? A decent amount. 35, 7, 5, 2, 70, 0. Oh, I'm sorry, that was supposed to be a 5. 35 minus 15. Put in our decimal and add that 0. 150, and now let's go 4. And that would be 140. And then it will continue on. Okay, so each person is going to get each share, I'm sorry, is 1,921 roughly. All right, so you can get rid of all of this. Okay, so now then the first person times 20, find the first person's share. So we have 0, 2, 4, 8, 3. There's our first person's share. 1921 times 8, 16, 72, 73, 8, 15, and then 1921 times 7, 14, 63, 64, 13. Okay, so there are everyone's shares. And our third example from section 126 states, again, there are 2 fountains, the first of which will fill a certain reservoir in 2.5 hours, and the second will fill the same reservoir in 3 3/4 hours. How much time will be required to fill the reservoir by means of both fountains running at the same time? So what we need to do is figure out how much these these fountains can fill of the reservoir in 1 hour. So we have we're going to be taking our first fountain. We know it can fill the reservoir in 2.5 hours, but how much can it fill in 1 hour? So we're going to take 1 and divide it by 2.5, which is also 5 halves, and that gives us 2/5. Alright, so it can fill 2/5 of the reservoir in 1 hour. Now the third, we're going to do the same thing. So 1 divided by 3 3/4, which is 15/4, is going to give us 4/15. Alright, so the first fountain can fill 2/5 of the reservoir in an hour, and the second fountain can fill 4/15 of the reservoir in an hour. So how much can they fill together in 1 hour? So we have 2/5 plus 4/15. Clearly we need a common denominator, so that takes us to 6/15 plus 4/15. Oops, that's a 4. Equals 10/15. Alright, so they can fill 10 together. They can fill 10/15 of the reservoir in 1 hour. Now, how long is it going to take them to fill the unit of the reservoir at 10/15 per hour? So now we're going to take the unit of 1, which is now going to be talking about the reservoir. The unit 1 here is the reservoir. The unit 1 here is the time. Here we're talking about the reservoir divided by their total filling capacity, and that is going to give us 15/10, which then 15/10 of an hour is going to be 1.5. We reduce that and we get 1.5 hours. This is the type of question that really, labels are really going to help you. Reservoirs per hour of the reservoir. So we've got 1 hour divided by how much, how many reservoirs per hour it can fill. I don't know. I'm trying to come up with a label for the rate. And that gives us 2/5 of the reservoir. Again, we have 1 hour divided by, it takes, the rate is reservoirs per hour. Reservoirs, here we have reservoirs per hour. Our reservoirs cancel and we're left with hours. So in some cases you're really going to want to look at what that label is and how that's going to apply. So this is just really something that you need to kind of step back and really think about what needs to be done. You're going to be looking at a number that dividing is relative to something else, but other than that, there isn't like a strict algorithm that you're going to be following. The actual methods of problem solving have changed for every problem that we've done, but in every instance, our final number has always been one number divided by something that depends on something else. I know it's a little bit difficult to kind of wrap your brain around that, but the actual math, you just need to think, okay, so what is it asking me, and what do I need to do first, and so how do these two numbers relate to each other so that I can divide my final amount, my one reservoir, my total inheritance, my total profits? How can I divide that amount by these numbers that relate to each other somehow? As always feel free to email me with any questions you have, and I'm sure we'll have a lot to talk about at the live chat this week.